We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the centre of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 21st of July 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, Japan's coalition loses its majority in the upper house. We'll have the latest on a huge day in the country's politics. Also ahead in the next 60 minutes.
We see autocracies rise all over the place, and we see them being very well connected and not shying away from the most atrocious things and measures.
The Vice President of the European Parliament tells us about one of the bloc's biggest challenges, the erosion of democracy. We'll hear from an author who believes that Donald Trump's tariffs will hurt everyone, most of all the US. And I'll be joined by Monocle's luxury markets editor, Brenda Toohey, to talk fashion. Good morning, Brenda. What's on your radar?
I'm going to talk about all of the good news at Burberry and how they've turned things around for the better.
Thank you for that. Plus Monday's newspapers and K-pop too. That's all ahead on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. Health authorities run by Hamas in Gaza say 88 people have been killed by Israeli gunfire across the territory. Sudan's military government says it wants to rebuild the capital Khartoum within 6 months. And one of the world's biggest collections of accordions is auctioned today. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, we begin today's programme with this weekend's elections in Japan causing a major turn in the country's political path. Japan's governing coalition has now lost its majority in the upper house. It places the government in the minority now in both the upper and lower houses, leaving both the fate of the Prime Minister in the balance, and has also opened up opportunities for more right-wing voices to be heard. Well, I'm joined now by Julian Ryle, who's a Daily Telegraph's correspondent in Japan. Julian, a very good afternoon to you. The time has gone, just 2 minutes past 3 in the afternoon where you are. Has the enormity of the results sunk in yet?
I think it's going to take quite a while for these results to sink in. This is, as you said, a major diversion in the way that the Japanese political landscape has been. It's remarkable to think that this is the first time since 1955 that the Liberal Democratic Party has not had a majority in at least one of the two houses in the Diet. That's how much of an earthquake we've seen here on Sunday.
So what has happened? Why have we got here?
The LDP has been in decline for some time, and in the last couple of years in particular, it has fractured. It was always a coalition of like-minded people rather than a real political party, and they were, to a large extent, held together by political supremos, if you like. I think perhaps the best example of that is Shinzo Abe, who was murdered on the campaign trail 3 years ago. But he really did hold it all together. Without that political supremo overseeing the party, it's tended to go in some strange directions for a conservative party. The last two leaders have taken it slightly to the centre, and that has really upset traditionalists, the conservatives and the nationalists, and that has made the far right wing of the party fragment. Weakening, obviously, the LDP, but then leading to the rise of these far-right nationalist parties that we're seeing today and have done very well over on Sunday's election.
Yes, tell us more about those, because the rise of these far-right parties, is it Sanseito, which is a sort of a breakthrough party? It's pushing a line which is now becoming very recognisable across the world with Japan first. Who are they and how did they manage to they've made huge gains, haven't they?
Absolutely. And as you say, Sanseito is perhaps the one that everyone's looking at. But there are a couple of other parties that have also emerged and won seats for the first time, or at least enlarged their footprint on Sunday. But yes, Sanseito is the largest. And they really are sort of campaigning on a very Japanese first platform, but they make no bones about it. They take their cues from the MAGA movement in America and the far right movements that have emerged in the UK. Reform in Britain and Le Pen's political party in France and the German far right party that has also emerged in the last few years. A lot of what they stand for is less immigration. They want fewer foreigners coming here. And I think they look, in many ways, at what has happened in Europe, and they see, in their words, perhaps a dilution of their national identity, rising crime, and they say they don't want that to happen here. The number of foreign residents, permanent residents of Japan is a fraction of what it is in most European countries. In the US, I think it's only 3.3% of the entire population. But they look at other countries and they say that that's not what they want for Japan. And they have hit a note with the Japanese public. Indeed.
I mean, it's one of those almost self-fulfilling prophecies, isn't it? Because if you go online now and you look at what's happening in Japan, there is an awful lot of coverage of foreigners, either tourists or migrants, not behaving in a way which is seemly for Japan.
Absolutely, yes. Japan is a very traditional nation. They pride themselves on their politeness and their respect for authority. And as you say, foreigners come in and they do things in a slightly different manner. To you and I, perhaps these are very minor things, not stowing their baggage on the trains appropriately, or not separating their rubbish appropriately. But to the Japanese, these are very important parts of their society and their national identity in many ways. And they do not want that tampered with. So, yeah, I can honestly say that I think we're going to see more of this in the future. I think Sanseito and these other right-wing parties are going to be picking up the slack that the LDP is losing. And I don't think the centrist or the left-wing parties in traditional Japanese politics, they're not picking up enough votes to sort of challenge that.
Let's look at the fate of the Prime Minister. He has said that he is not going to go because he needs to steer the country through. To what degree do we actually think that Shigeru Ishiba will actually stay the course? Because he has an economy to strengthen, and he also has an enormous battle ahead of him with the Trump tariffs due to come in on the 1st of August.
Wants the job. Ishiba is there because he hasn't been challenged, because, as you said, it's going to be extremely difficult to deal with Mr. Trump over the next few weeks until the August the 1st deadline for the next round of tariffs being imposed. And of course, Japan has huge problems with the national debt, an economy that's in difficult straits, a worsening population. There are many, many problems, and many politicians do not want his role. But there is one who's emerging, Sanae Takaichi, who is a hawk on the right of the party. And the suggestion is, she's already hinted that she's already planning an effort to unseat the Prime Minister, and is almost certainly doing backroom deals as we speak. And that would, if she is elected, that would bring the party back to its conservative, almost nationalist roots more. And therefore, some of the supporters that it has lost in the last couple of years might gravitate back to it rather than going to these minority far-right parties. And looking at the way that the markets have behaved, markets are closed today, aren't they, in Japan, because it's a holiday, but the yen has risen today in this knowledge, in having been told that the Prime Minister is going to stay in power. There is a need for business certainty, isn't there? Absolutely. I think that's exactly it. There is a need for continuity. This is the administration that has been dealing with Mr. Trump. To change direction now could undo a lot of the good work. Obviously, nothing has been achieved yet, but at the same time, they do have the groundwork in place. They are talking. I understand that the minister is heading back to Washington next week as like a final last-ditch effort to head off these tariffs. But yeah, I think the sense is that now would not be the right time to change leadership. Having said that, Takaichi is certainly putting together a group of like-minded politicians who will support her when the time comes. She's biding her time. She's very ambitious, and I can very much see her as the next Prime Minister of Japan.
Domestically, we now have a situation where the governing coalition no longer has control of either the lower or the upper house. The lower house effectively has more influence and is the bigger engine when it comes to driving policy and creating laws and policies. But what does it now mean that the upper house has gone?
As you said, the lower house is more influential. The upper house, to lose both is a disaster. Not so much for policy making, but just for a minority government in both houses makes Ishiba look extremely weak, and the party look extremely weak. It's rudderless. And I just think that the ordinary Japanese people have just had enough of the uncertainty and of all the economic problems that they're facing at the moment. And they do want the political situation here to be sorted out one way or the other. And I think, perhaps they see Sanseito and some of these other right-wing parties as offering a better option.
So if you were waking up this morning or you're mid-afternoon on a holiday and you are a small business owner in Tokyo, how does the future look for you with this political uncertainty?
Not good, I would have to say. The uncertainty is perhaps a consequence of the economic problems, and there are no signs on the horizon that this administration has got the tools to repair that, to get that back on track. And everyone is extremely concerned about Mr. Trump following through on his threats of imposing tariffs that would be just crippling on this country. 8% of all Japanese workers are in some way involved in the auto industry through the supply chains and companies and businesses that are reliant on that sector. And if the tariffs are imposed on Japan's auto industry, as they are going to be at the moment, then that will be a serious blow to Japan, the Japanese economy and the Japanese people.
Julian Ryle from the Daily Telegraph in Tokyo, thank you so much for joining us on The Globalist. Now, at the end of last week, Donald Trump made fresh threats to the European Union on tariffs. He's now demanding a minimum of 15 to 20% tariffs on imports from the EU. And the return of Donald Trump to the White House has raised concerns in Brussels and Strasbourg about two key challenges. Firstly, that of remaining competitive in the face of huge global economic instability. Secondly, preserving democracy. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to the Vice President of the European Parliament, Caterina Bali, about these two issues. And she began by telling me just how precarious a situation the bloc finds itself when it comes to democracy.
We see it crumbling outside of the European Union, but also within. We see autocracies rise all over the place, and we see them being very well connected and not shying away from the most atrocious things and measures. So if we don't pay attention, we will find ourselves in a very uncomfortable place pretty soon.
What do you mean by finding yourself in an uncomfortable place?
Well, you can see in the US what autocrats do. I mean, they don't hesitate to strip your basic rights, your fundamental rights. They don't hesitate to lie and to be corrupt. So it can happen to you that you lose your social insurance, you lose your job, but you lose your dignity also if you don't fit into what they think is the right way to be. I think the problem is not acknowledging it and realizing what is happening. The problem is to find the right measures against it, because the world has changed so much when it comes to information, communication. So the old measures don't work anymore. Being a politician, we are used to delivering good policy, making lives better for the people we care for, which are different issues from different parties, of course, but you do a good job and then people vote for you. And it's not like that anymore. Not at all. It's completely, there is no link between what you deliver, for whom you deliver something, and who votes or doesn't vote for you.
How's that worked for you?
Well, I'm a German social democrat, so we are suffering from that a lot. I think social democrats in a lot of places are suffering more because we are so much focused on doing this, on making people's lives better. And we are not about, we want to stay in power and we want to, be the greatest, that we don't adapt, or at least I can say it for us in Germany, we're not adapting enough to this very much different situation.
One wonders whether some of the founding principles of the European Union have been lost. The fact remains that this organisation, this grouping together of member states, all came about through a desire for peace.
Absolutely. And it is still unique in the world. I mean, this continent is one that saw terrible wars like every decade. I mean, being German, in German there was a word for the French being inherited enemies. So like this would always stay that way. And this idea, I mean, imagine in the Middle East, politicians, people saying, look, we've fought each other for centuries now. We've made each other's lives miserable as much as possible. We've killed each other. Stop here. We're going to create something new. We're going to get together, talk, negotiate, find common rules, exchange our youth, do trade with each other, and try to create something prosperous, peaceful, where people can live well.
And prosperity is an absolutely key element of how a nation, and indeed the European Union, is judged at the moment. When you see so many populist parties blaming citizens' poverty on migrants or dissatisfaction with the government. But the difficulty is that there is a sense at the moment that Europe itself isn't that competitive and is slightly losing the race, or losing the race when it comes to things like tech, when it comes to the automotive industry. That is Europe finding itself on the back foot here?
Well, we have to become more active. I think that is absolutely true. But the good thing about things developing so quickly and changing so quickly is that you can also, hop onto that. Like, we do have a lot of brilliant startups in Europe, in the UK, as well as in the EU, but they come to a point where they want to become really big, and then it's the American companies who then take over. So we have to care much better for the brilliant minds and people that we have and the ideas that they bring forward.
But that fact remains is that there needs to be something that the European Union can sell to the outside world to make it irresistible. It needs to be more business and market savvy.
Yes, well, we have to attract others, but I was talking more about seeing what we also have. Now, defense is not such a sexy business area, but it is a business area at the moment. And we have, for example, quite a small German company that is developing drones for the Ukrainian defense. And they are doing a brilliant job, and they are growing like mad. We have European clouds now coming up. We have semiconductors being developed and produced more now in Europe. So we have to support research, but we also have to support the scaling up. And there are programs for that. The one maybe silver bullet is a capital union. In the European Union, we don't have a capital union yet. So you can't get big investments that go cross-border. This is something we have to work on for sure.
So if you were a small business somewhere in the European Union listening to this, what advice would you give them to make sure that they can grow to the best of their ability and their capacity?
Well, if you're in an innovative sector, then it would make sense to make contact with your government, because there are so many funds out there at the moment to boost innovation, and it's the member states that distribute these means. And I think there's a lot of support that you can get.
Anything else you want to add?
Oh, there's so much we could talk about, but I think it's very important that we don't take the European Union for granted. that we stand up for our values and promote democracy and our European values actively.
That was European Parliament Vice President Katerina Barley talking to me a little earlier. Still to come on today's programme.
He's taxed nearly all other nations and indeed some uninhabited islands in the process, and so he's alienating many of the people he would have made as his allies.
More on Donald Trump and how his tariffs may hurt everybody. Stay with us on The Globalist.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, an obsessive attention to detail. With UBS House View, you get the big picture in bite-sized articles, delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts, all focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals. UBS. Banking is our craft.
7:20 a.m. here in London. Let's have a look at today's newspapers. I'm delighted to say that joining me in the studio is Yasmin Abdel-Majid, Sudanese-Australian broadcaster and author. A very good morning to you, Yasmin. Yasmin, you're suited and booted today. It's like you're taking Monday morning by the horns. What's going on?
Well,
You're much taller than I am in your shoes.
That's what happens when I wear heels. I sort of loom over people. I've got a panel tonight with English Pen on, I think the official title is Sudan, Power and Freedom of Expression. And so we're kind of looking at the narrative around Sudan, as a quote unquote forgotten war, and looking at whose responsibility is it to remember and who that discourse kind of serves. And so, I think that we're doing a few events with English Pen around Sudan this year, which is fantastic. So I'm looking forward to it at the Conduit Club.
Well, let's, if you are in London, Yasmin will be around and et cetera, et cetera. Let's talk about Khartoum and the fact that it is now in the headlines that the Prime Minister has landed at Khartoum airport for the first time in more than 2 years since the civil war began, and is promising to rebuild Khartoum within 6 months. That to me suggests that the war is over.
Yeah, and that is exactly what they want you to think. Okay. So it's interesting, sort of, I think, as a Sudanese person and a sort of, a reporter and so on, reading these pieces of news, because ultimately, since Khartoum was retaken by the Sudanese armed forces a couple of months ago, there's been this real push to sort of create this narrative that the war is over, things are all going to be fine, and you can see people responding to this. You can see people returning to Sudan. When I was with my family in Egypt and Eid a couple of months ago, many of the elders were like, okay, the army's back in Khartoum, so that means we can return. The reality on the ground, of course, is that although the majority of the RSF, the militia, has been pushed out, that does not mean that, it is necessarily safe. It does not mean there's no water, no electricity, no infrastructure and so on. And clashes have sort of continued across the country. And so especially in the West, where the militia has sort of their main base of power, and it's still looking like there is a chance that the RSF could essentially control an entire section of the country. But while all that is still happening, and while there are major clashes in Kordofan and El Fasher and so on, what we're seeing is the armed forces, led in this moment by the Prime Minister Kamel Idris, who was again sort of unilaterally installed by the General Burhan, who's the head of the Sudanese armed forces, coming in and presenting as if all is well. And so he's visiting Khartoum for the first time since the war began. And he's also called his government the government of hope. And so he's installed a number of ministers, I think 22 ministers of security, of infrastructure and so on. It is unclear exactly where the funding for this massive infrastructure building and so on will come from. But I think the government is putting the cost at 700 billion nationwide, right? So it's not it's a significant amount. Khartoum alone would be accounting for about half of that. So we're looking at 350 billion, and that's just infrastructure and so on. So it is.
And that money, where is it going to come from? Because if you look at the Sudan Tribune today, it's talking about the fact that the European Union has imposed a fourth round of sanctions on the Sudanese on over the Sudan conflict, sanctioning everybody, not every single side, and trying just to bring about some sort of order and some sort of long-term peace. Internationally speaking, to have the Sudanese conflict still bubbling along and as you say, not resolved. I mean, what sort of long-term prospects does that offer to Sudan?
Well, this is where you start to look at who are the regional interests and what are they sort of asking for in exchange, perhaps, for funding for infrastructure. So you've got a lot of interest in the Red Sea port. So you've got Russia really wanting a port. You've got the United Arab Emirates really kind of wanting not only sort of access to a port there, but wanting land in terms of, because there's like really fertile agriculture. Turkey as well is interested. I mean, there's been relationships with both from the militia and the armed forces with Iran, with drones and so on. So you might see Iran also sort of getting involved, and all of these different countries in the area, Saudi, Egypt. Of course, if they can, I mean, Egypt has no money to speak of at the moment. They've got kind of their own domestic problems. But if you look at countries like the UAE and Saudi, all of these will be perhaps offering support for the rebuild, but asking for a lot in return.
OK, let's move on to a story in the Financial Times from today. UK government seeks way out of clash with US over Apple encryption. This is how governments try to navigate and negotiate with two things with America, the tech giants, and also now the difficulty of, again, Donald Trump's administration weighing in.
Yeah, and this is an interesting one personally, because it's one of the first times where I'm not as mad at the tech companies as I usually would be, right? Because what the United Kingdom's Home Office has required, so I think it was in January, the Home Office ordered the tech giant Apple to grant access to its most secure cloud storage system. And so they wanted Apple to build a backdoor into its encrypted services, its encrypted cloud system. And Apple sort of put its foot down and said no. And so they then pulled out, right? Because ultimately, if the UK government had required Apple to build in a backdoor, yes, they could say, okay, this is just a backdoor we will use in, particular serious circumstances and whatnot, but you've built the backdoor. And Apple have sort of said no. And so they completely removed that. If you're in the UK, you would notice that you can no longer use end-to-end encrypted Apple cloud services. And now the United States is sort of pushing back against this entirely and saying, well, how dare you tell us, our US tech companies, what we can and can't do with relation to encryption. J.D. Vance as well, surprisingly, has kind of gotten involved in this. And an official in the UK Technology Department said the Vice President is very annoyed about this and it needs to be resolved, saying the Home Office is basically going to back down. And so now Keir Starmer's in this situation where he's sort of trying to support his own Home Office while also trying to keep this relationship with the US, especially as they're continuing to have conversations around AI and data partnerships on an even keel. Not quite sure how he's going to do that.
Finally, let's stay with the Financial Times and stay with technology and apps, but have that wonderful moment when apps are now telling us to all go and meet each other instead of trying to have conversations online. How on earth is this going to happen if my app tells me to put my app down?
It's kind of cute, this story. It's about dating apps getting personal to counter the fatigue, especially among Gen Z. So online matchmaking apps, whether it's Hinge or Tinder and so on, have started to use things like work with foreplay and double and offer double dating features, introduce a little bit more friction before people start to have conversations, even looking at introducing like AI-assisted chatbots. I mean, you're looking at me with great concern, Emma.
Yes. I don't understand anything that you've just said.
Yeah. Well, I think ultimately what we've seen is that these dating apps had a real high during the pandemic, right? And the sort of peak was in around 2021, but they've kind of fallen off a cliff since then. And Gen Z tend not to use these dating apps as often as like millennials and so on. And so they're sort of looking at different ways to get people to use them. And one of the things they have realized is that people don't want to spend as much time on their phones. They want to interact in person. So it's like trying to get people to move from the apps to in-person interactions. I mean, they are seeing, slight increases in the number of Gen Z people using them, slight increases also in the number of actual users. And so it's interesting. I mean, I kind of feel for the younger people in a way. God, what have I become? But
I'm just going to let you dig your own hole with this one, Yasmin. This is fine. You just keep going.
This is great. I'll return back to the piece in the Financial Times, which is talking about how younger users who have warned in surveys that they've grown tired of using dating apps because of their perceived tendency to draw people into short-term flings over long-term connections. There's also people reporting concerns about receiving unsolicited material and violent threats and so on. And so, this is not only just about getting young people to sort of meet each other in person, but shares in Match and Bumble plummeted more than 80% since their 2021 highs. So I think these apps are trying to see if they have a future.
Yasmin Abdelmajid, thank you so much for joining us in the studio. The time here in London is 7:30 a.m. You're listening to The Globalist. Now, a quick look at what else we're keeping an eye on today. Health authorities run by Hamas in Gaza say 88 people have been killed by Israeli gunfire across the territory. A UN aid convoy crossing from Israel ran into a crowd of civilians, and the UN says they were shot at. Israel says it doesn't deliberately target aid trucks. Sudan's military government is stepping up its efforts to rebuild the capital, Khartoum. Its leader, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, flew into the airport for the first time since the civil war began 2 years ago. The government says it wants to rebuild Khartoum within 6 months. And one of the world's biggest collections of accordions is auctioned today. Held in Belfast, the sale contains around 750 of the instruments. They belong to a collector called Ken Hopkins, affectionately known as Accordion Ken. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now for a look behind some of the headlines we're following, and we head to France today. Monocle's Claudia Jacob has picked her favourite spots for a weekend escape.
Since opening in 2020, Tuba Club in Les Goudes, a pretty fishing village just south of Marseille proper, has quickly become a summer institution in France's second city. Founders Greg Gassa, an entrepreneur, and film producer Fabrice Denisot saw the potential of this no-frills former swimming club. They lured a smart, younger crowd to soak up the laid-back atmosphere among dramatic rocks and lemon and cream-hued loungers. The founders tapped their childhood friend, architect Marion Mailender, to take the bones of a bathing club and create something to match Marseille's sultry summer mood. The brief? A friendly space that riffs on Le Corbusier's wooden cabin at Roquebrune, Cap Martin, and the fetching bar that neighbours them, l'Étoile de Mer. In 2023, Tuba Club added a new villa to its 5 fuss-free cabanon-style huts, providing an ideal platform to dive into resident chef Sylvain Roucarol's excellent cookery.
And my thanks to Claudia Jacob for that. For more from Monocle's editors and correspondents, sign up for our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute. You can find it at monocle.com/minute. Now, the consequences of Donald Trump's tariff demands of the US trading partners may just be beginning to bite. America's Consumer Prices Index, the CPI, is back on the rise, with prices climbing across retail. Well, one man who's following developments closely is the British business journalist and columnist Philip Coggan. His new book, The Economic Consequences of Mr. Trump, What the Trade War Means for the World, has just been released. And Philip wrote the book in the past few months after Trump's so-called Liberation Day tariff announcement on April the 2nd. He spoke to Andrew Muller, who began by asking him whether he thinks Trump understands what tariffs actually are.
I think he tends to see them as a tax on foreigners. Economic evidence suggests they end up largely being paid by domestic businesses and consumers. Some of it may be born of incidents, economists talk about, by foreigners, but the bulk of it is likely to fall under domestic economy. So he also doesn't understand that he is taxing, which is what a tariff is, a lot of the inputs of American businesses. 45% of what Americans import are raw materials and components for things they make. So every time you put on a tariff, you increase the costs of your domestic producers.
Presumably people have at least tried to tell him this, and presumably he has ignored them and thinking his judgment is superior to theirs. But is there any case that can be made for the tariff regime he has imposed? Is it, in inverted commas, working in any sense at all?
It's only working in the sense that it's raising some money. Obviously, that's probably the burden that's largely being borne by his own taxpayers. But no, the regime he unveiled on April the 2nd, and he's kind of coming out with a sort of second version now, back to the futile is what I've dubbed it, was based on the erroneous assumption that any country that had a trade surplus with the US was cheating. And it's not because of that. Other countries do not have significant tariffs on the US. It's quite natural for you to have deficits with some countries and surpluses with others. He's taxing Brazil 50%, even when the US has a trade surplus with Brazil. There was a case for targeting China, which does not treat all foreign traders equally. And if he wanted to do that, then of course he would have wanted to line up all other nations behind him. But of course he's taxed nearly all other nations and indeed some uninhabited islands in the process. And so he's alienating many of the people he would have made as his allies.
There's also this idea, which you do address in the book, that in the long term, and it would need to be the extremely long term, imposing a rigid protectionist regime like this might lead to a return to the United States of manufacturing jobs. Is there any argument that that would be a good thing, or is that just misplaced nostalgia for a particular idea of what a 1950s, 1960s working class life was like?
I think it's very much misplaced nostalgia, and that's one of the reasons for the title of the book, which echoes back to a bad decision 100 years ago. Manufacturing employment has been declining as a percentage of the total across the Western world for 50, 60 years, even in Germany, which has a trade surplus. And the main reason is not trade, it's technology. We make things more efficiently with fewer people. In the same way, in agriculture, from most of the people being employed in agriculture 200 years ago, it's only 1% to 2% in most economies now. But we have plenty of food. So if he tries to bring back the manufacturing of some low-value goods like textiles or shoes or apparel, then all he'll do is transfer resources from businesses that make higher margin goods like aerospace. And that will reduce the overall productivity of the country. So if you go back 250 years when Adam Smith first pointed this out, you make the things you're most efficient at making and you buy the things you're less efficient at making from other countries. Just as you present radio programs and then go out and spend the money you receive on goods and services. So do I. If I try to make all the goods and services that I consume, it would cost me a lot more. They would be terrible goods and services. And I would have, not very many things.
So what is the outlook then if Trump maintains these stances as far as that proves possible for the next 3.5 years? What does that do to the American economy in the next 3.5 years?
Well, there's two possibilities. So he could stick with one set of tariffs and maintain them for 3.5 years. I think the general effect would be higher inflation, slower growth, greater inequality, because they tend to fall more on the burden of tariffs tend to fall more on lower income people. If he varies the tariffs every few months because he's spotted something that another nation has done that annoys him,
like
as with Brazil.
Exactly.
Then I think it would be even worse because businesses wouldn't know where to invest or how to invest because they wouldn't be sure of how they would be taxed over the next 6 or 9 months. Why move your business back to the US if you believe in the taco trade? Trump always chickens out. You'll wait to see what the final tariff regime looks like.
So if we assume then that the United States and Donald Trump, if they're going to learn this, they're going to learn the hard way, are there potential advantages for other countries or entities? Is there business here that the European Union or China or whoever else could pick up if America doesn't want it?
I think there's enormous loss of soft power to the US, but also China looks like a much more reliable partner to many countries in the world than the US, which are just suddenly imposing random tariffs on them. And in the past, China had some dodgy aspects to it from those countries' point of view. And I think there's also a potential benefit to other countries if they just say, OK, the US wants to punch itself in the face by imposing these tariffs. We don't want to punch ourselves in the face. Why don't we collaborate with each other? Why don't we stick to the rules of governing global trade between ourselves, reduce barriers? The US is a smaller proportion of global trade than it is of the global economy. And so it's possible, if everybody's sensible, possible to reduce the impact of what the US is doing.
I just have a final question, which is more about the process of writing the book than the content of it. I think anybody who has attempted to write anything about either of Donald Trump's administrations is familiar with the feeling of having written, 5 or 6 paragraphs, which you feel quite happy with, then looking up at the TV and going, oh my God, and deleting the whole thing. Terse a tract though your book is, how nerve-wracking is it actually sending the thing to print? Because the spectre of being overtaken by events must have loomed above you at all times.
Absolutely. Well, the key points, which is that tariffs aren't good, they're not the thing that govern the trade deficit, we won't bring back manufacturing jobs, and the overall effect of Trump's packages is to hurt the poor and increase the rich. That's unlikely to change, I don't think. But the chaos that we're seeing even now is part of the point. Yes, it's changing all the time, and the chaos is a key part of the criticism. And his inconsistency is what the book describes, and that inconsistency is likely to continue, even if the individual details of the policies go out of date.
That was Philip Coggan there, talking to Andrew Muller. And Philip's book, The Economic Consequences of Mr. Trump, What the Trade War Means for the World, is out now. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. "7:40 here in London. Let's talk aviation now. Sally Gethin is the aviation analyst and journalist and regular voice here on Monocle Radio. Good morning, Sally. How are you?
Morning. I'm well, thank you.
Good to have you with us. Let us focus first on the continuing concerns following the Air India crash. No one knows what happened in that cockpit, and there are now renewed calls for what happens when pilots take off and land to be filmed.
Yes, absolutely. So obviously, I guess the big shock value that came out of the preliminary report was this question over the fuel control switches. How come they were in the on position, in the run position, in the cutoff position rather than the run position as the flight climbed. And so really we can't know that because the data is not giving us that reassurance. So really we need to look at what the visuals were. And of course, we can't know that because there weren't any cameras in the actual cockpit at the time. So now there are renewed calls for that. But of course, up till now, there have never been cameras in the cockpit.
And what is the general thought among the aviation industry about whether the camera in the cockpit does now need to be part of the whole flying experience?
Well, conventionally, air pilot unions have opposed this, citing privacy concerns. But there have been other investigations into incidents where it wasn't conclusive. And I think really this is why it's gaining more traction, is that if it could be conclusive, we need that information. So, I mean, it was brought up about 10 years ago, actually, when there were a few other incidents, very rare, I have to say, but there were some questions about it. So I think we could see renewed calls for this.
Let's move on to another part of getting through the sort of the general journey that everybody undertakes. The 100 millilitre liquids rule, something that is an annoyance and something that airports have been trying to get rid of for quite a while, or indeed work around them. Where are we with that?
So for about the last year or so, this has been an on-off situation that scanners, very high-tech scanners coming into UK airports. They were supposed to have come in to be implemented at UK airports a year ago, but there was a problem. There are not many of these suppliers of these particular scanners, and there were some installation and tech issues with them. Now, a couple of airports have installed the scanners. That's Edinburgh, Birmingham. But the problem is that it's a patchy picture. So, of course, for passengers, they're not clear about where they can bring more than the 100 millilitre rule, their tiny toiletries, so to speak, or not. But it is going to be a patchy picture as these are eventually rolled out.
And does that actually affect the people's decisions as to which airports to use? That idea of ease of travel is something that we all prize, isn't it?
Absolutely. But then because it's not officially announced, so to speak, it's hard to know. So, of course, it's almost word of mouth. Oh, well, those scanners are in place. Well, it's going to be an easier check-in process. But it's not that clear across the UK. And I have to say in the United States as well, there have been some changes there. So they've relaxed the shoe rule, for example, that you had to take off your shoes. So these things are a little bit airport by airport basis, and that it's not an obvious announcement, or it's not an obvious picture. So passengers are advised to stick by the original rules to be on the safe side.
Let's look at a story that's coming through on Aviation Week about the flight hours are now, the number of hours that aircraft spend in the air is now well above pre-pandemic levels. Everything is well and truly back, isn't it, Sally?
Yeah, so this data shows that actually, yes, as if we didn't already know it, since the pandemic, things are back, and the average flight time last year increased to 2 hours and 14 minutes. And this shows that the aggregate hours are up 11% compared to 2019 before the pandemic. So, yes, you're absolutely right. Officially, air travel is definitely on the up.
Is anybody that Is anybody that surprised by this news? Because it is good news, and it should. Are we now back to normal?
We are back to normal, and I think it's gone under the radar, so to speak, because of this return to travel, and we are picking up from before the pandemic. Of course, for the air industry, it's a bit more complex than that, because of course everything, profitability, everything took such a huge hit. But yes, it's from a global point of view, because remember, certain parts of the world were a bit slower to return, to come back to flying again than others. So, for example, China and a few countries in Southeast Asia were a bit slower, but now it's leveled out, and aggregate flight hours are back.
Sally Gethin, thank you as ever for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist.
There's a craft to every question, which is why at UBS, we query every aspect of the market, working with specialized experts and award-winning research teams, covering over 3,500 stocks in 50 countries, all delivered in a comprehensive library, answering what you want with what you need. UBS, banking is our craft.
At 7:47 here in London now, Burberry is bouncing back. The British heritage brand has seen its share price jump in response to American sales rising following all this. Brenda Toohey, Monocle's luxury markets editor. A very good morning to you, Brenda. How are we?
I'm really, really well, Emma, and I'm delighted that Burberry is bouncing back.
It is good, isn't it? Because it's one of those heritage brands that seem very vulnerable to fortune. It's either doing phenomenally well or it is in dire straits. What is it about Burberry that sort of seems so extreme?
Well, I think that maybe they lost their way along the way, but they're back. They understand what they do really, really well. And that's quite simple. It's trench coats, it's outerwear, it's scarves. And they have put their money back into those staples, and they are reaping the rewards. And I think that's what we all want from Burberry. It is a heritage brand. It's the classic trench coat, the beautiful scarf, and the younger generation like a little bit of outerwear with
indeed.
That Burberry check.
Who's snapping up these things? Because I mentioned there that there are sales up in America. I think they're up by, is it 4%? Which is good. But who is Burberry's new market?
I think that Burberry's new market really are the people who were their market all along. And now that they are creating items that we want to wear, we're buying them again.
Indeed. So just run us through you've talked about the classic coats and the classic scarves. What is it that made people fall in love with that all along? Because the classic coats and the classic scarves have arguably always been there.
Yes, they have, but they were harder to find.
Okay.
They might have been right at the back of the shop. Burberry have cleverly also created something called the Scarf Bar, which they're going to run out into 200 stores worldwide. Their scarves, again, are no longer hidden in drawers. They're going to be center stage in the middle of the shop. They're in a myriad of colors. I think there could be 100 colors, actually. They're silk, they're cashmere. You can have them monogrammed right there as you wait. So they are really focusing on their staples and putting them center stage everywhere.
And what kind of lesson is this now giving to other luxury brands when it comes to good heritage branding and not straying too far from what you do well? Because I think we've seen, and we've talked about this quite a lot, the fact that when you have 101 creative directors coming into luxury brands and having to reinvent, and you almost lose sense of what the original DNA of a brand was like. So why is it that Burberry has managed to get why is it getting it right now?
I think it's taken on Joshua Schulman, who had come from Coach leather goods previously. I think he has a very good head on his shoulders. I think he understands the brand. I think he's looked at its heritage. He's looked at its lineage. And he also understands leather goods. And he is developing proper goods within the Burberry brand to satisfy its customer. And also, maybe we're buying less and we're buying better. That is a big message. So let's all do that, and Burberry understand that.
And we have America pushing upwards. Chinese sales are down. That's something right across the board, isn't it, for every single brand?
I think it is, yes. And European sales aren't where they should be either for the brand. I mean, Italians historically loved that Burberry tartan and check. So let's see. I'm sure he can pull it all back in all of those territories, but he's doing very well here and in the United States.
And the US, it's interesting to know that everybody's talking about the US being quite tricky at the moment because of all the other stuff that's happening. But actually, business and retail just seems to be getting on with it, doesn't it? Not necessarily buffeted by everything that's happening in the geopolitical world.
I think it is getting on there. With regards to Burberry, of course, they did help themselves by offloading 1,700 jobs, which of course, helped with the losses that they were making in the past. And the United States is a huge market, and if you get it right there, as we all know, and do things properly there's a lot of money to be made.
And so what does Burberry do next? Does it just carry on doing what it's doing well?
I think so, yes. I think they would like to get their feet under the table more securely in some of the other territories we've mentioned.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Brenda Toohey joining me in the studio. You're listening to The Globalist live on Monocle Radio. Let's end today's programme with the latest from the world of K-pop. I'm joined now by Bernie Cho, president of the Seoul-based K-pop agency DFSB Collective, and a very regular voice here on Monocle Radio. Good afternoon, Bernie. How are you?
It's a good afternoon here in a very hot and steamy Seoul.
Excellent. I'm glad to see it. Well, I'm assuming that everybody's now listening wildly to lots of radio to try and calm themselves down, or lots of music. So what is happening where you are, apart from everyone getting the talc and the fans out?
Well, right now, obviously Blackpink has just started their world tour. Their latest single, Jump, has done incredibly well. It's hit #1 globally on the Spotify charts. BTS, finally out of the army for their army fans. And they, too, just released a live album. But over the past few days, and if anything, over the past few weeks, there have been some very pleasant surprises in the K-pop industry. One of them being a K-pop boy band. Now, it's sort of become more or less the rule rather than the exception that K-pop boy bands, or for that matter, girl bands, will have multinational, multicultural, and obviously multilingual members. But there's a new band that's been getting a lot of headlines, a lot of buzz, a lot of press called One Verse. And what's fascinating about them is you have 2 members from the U.S., you have 1 member from Japan, but you have 2 other members from, of all places, North Korea. And truth be told, although a lot of people are a little bit skeptical as to whether or not North Koreans can pull off the boy band concept, I got to be truthfully honest, saw the new video, Shattered, listened to the new songs on the single, and it holds its own. It's actually quite good, both the video and the song itself. And right out of the gates, granted, they're not near the 10 million YouTube subscribers as Blackpink, but they've already posted nearly 1,000 videos and have already garnered over 100,000 subscribers. And so it'll be interesting to see how this band does. They do stand out for a wide range of reasons, but thankfully, without all the hype and the hysteria, the music stands on its own.
It's interesting you say that the music stands on its own, because when you have this sort of this global appeal which K-pop now has, how important is it to a fan that you have Japanese, American and North Korean band members?
This is the first time, and hopefully we'll hear more of this, but the fact is that when you listen to the songs and you listen and watch the videos, the songs themselves are pretty much the standard sort of K-pop hit parade formula, where the lyrics, both the chorus and the verses, are a mix of English and Korean purely to target global audiences, and they pull it off. The singing and the stylings, it goes very smoothly. And so, again, if we sort of compare how the song and the video holds up to other K-pop contemporaries, it holds its own, and it's a good start.
Let's move on to how K-pop is doing in Netflix. I think K-pop Demon Hunters is a massive thing. It's getting even bigger, isn't it? What is it, Bernie, and why is it so popular?
This was a pleasant surprise, because when Netflix was rolling out for season 3 of Squid Game, all eyes, perhaps hearts and minds, were on Squid Game season 3, the finale. But what nobody saw coming was the massive hit, the moment that's really become a momentum for the animated film K-pop Demon Hunters. Obviously, those who were involved were hoping that it would do well, that it would do great, but nobody predicted that it would become the #1 movie in the world on Netflix for a few days running. So for a moment, you had Netflix having both the #1 and TV series and #1 movie, both from Korea. Now, this movie by no means has slowed down its momentum. It's actually been gaining momentum. Not only did it rate the highest among any Netflix movies on Rotten Tomatoes, but the songs from the movie. We have right now 8 songs currently on the Billboard Top 100 Singles chart, and the album continues to stay strong in the top 10. Right now, Korea and K-pop is having a moment, because not 1, not 2, but there are 3 K-pop albums this week in the top 10. Twice, the girl band, who actually has a song on the K-pop Demon Hunter soundtrack, their newest album came in at 6th. ATEEZ, who've been chart regulars in the top 10, they came in at 7th. But the surprise is K-pop Demon Hunters is currently ranked #5. And again, right now, one of the singles is currently at the top of the Billboard singles chart globally. But again, having 8 songs from one soundtrack is unheard of. And this is definitely a breakout moment that people are really surprised by. The fact that this is the first virtual band that's ever hit the top of the K-pop, not just the K-pop, but just the Billboard charts. And more importantly, the fact that they're out charting many of the biggest names in K-pop right now in the world is something that's just got a lot of people stunned. And what's even more interesting is it's sort of art imitating life, imitating art, where currently there are a lot of viral videos, a lot of memes of top K-pop stars dancing to and doing reenactments and reinterpretations of scenes from K-pop Demon Hunters.
Bernie Cho, thank you as ever for joining us on The Globalist. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to our producers, Hassan Anderson, Chris Chermack and Laura Kramer. Our researcher was Henry King and our studio manager was Mariella Bevan. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London and The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening. Have a good week.